David has a prayer request. I am struggling not to be consumed by hatred for MAGA and hopelessness. Okay. On that note, let's talk about something. Bear with me here, okay? This is going to sound kind of hopeless. It's going to sound like, oh my God, he's rehashing all the greatest hits of the last 60 days. But I promise, I hope you're able to see something in it. I've been feeling the same way. I've been feeling kind of like, oh, okay, we have never been here. Now, you know that recently, or the last few months, I've been trying to be a voice of hope, right? Don't worry about it. The Constitution's strong. The American Constitution is one of the most powerful, beautiful documents in the existence of humanity. It's an amazing thing, right? It's an amazing thing, and I have full faith the Constitution will hold its own against whatever lunacy comes out of the White House. Okay. I have been saying, it's up to us now, regardless of what goes on, we have to be the people that we're supposed to be. And if we're the people that we're supposed to be, that's all that matters. And I hope I've been offering somewhat hopeful messages about this kind of stuff. And yet it was yesterday. I was just sitting there, I was reading, and I've never been here before. Like I've never seen this before. I've never encountered. I can't remember ever reading a story where a PhD student was picked up on the sidewalk by men in masks, claiming to be ICE, the immigration police or whatever they call themselves, claiming to be ICE, and then taking her. And then listening to the Secretary of State say, oh yeah, no, we made that decision. Yes, she was here legally. No, she is not a criminal, but she was saying things we don't like. So you picked her up on the side of the street because she was saying things you don't like. Wow. And there was the gentleman who was picked up a couple of weeks ago, Khalil. And, for a long time, they weren't even sure where the guy is. They weren't sure where he is. They weren't sure what was going on with him. But yeah, he was picked up because he led protests at a university. So you didn't like what he said. He was saying things. He was expressing himself in ways. He was here legally. He was not involved in criminal activity. He was never charged with. He was never investigated for. He was never convicted of a crime. You're out. I'm reading stories about people. A couple of weeks ago, I read a story about a guy coming into the United States. They checked his laptop. They checked his social media. And they sent him home because he said some anti-Trumpian stuff, anti-MAGA stuff. I've heard that. My desire to travel to the U.S., I probably shouldn't because of what's on my social media and because of the content that I create. ABC News got sued because of the way they told a story. Right? They got sued and they gave up. They said, "Nope, yeah, we'll settle. Here's your money." Right? A law firm just recently, a major international law firm just settled, came to an agreement with Trump so that he would rescind an executive order he wrote specifically targeting them because they represented some people that were going after him. And they came to an agreement because they were... The executive order said something along the lines that they were going to be their opportunities to take on government contracts was going to be limited going forward, and that the government contracts that they have may actually be ripped up. And they said, "Oh, okay, yeah, we can't have that. So here's your money. We're gonna." I think they settled on, what was it, $40 million worth of free legal work. They're going to do $40 million worth of free legal work for him, and one of their managing partners I think that's what his title is, was quoted as saying, if we hadn't of, this would have destroyed us financially. This would have destroyed us financially. What's his name? Brian Cohen. Is that what's his? I forget how. What anyway? A content creator on YouTube has been promoting at the end of each one of his videos, and he's not the only one. So, but he's been promoting at the end of his videos. He's been saying, I don't know how much longer YouTube's going to let me be here, because at any point, Trump or MAGA, the administration, may put pressure on YouTube to shut us down. I don't remember being in a time like this when I actually would hear people make statements like this and go, oh yeah, no, I can see that. I mean, we've always heard people say, oh, they're trying to shut us down. And nobody's trying to shut you down. But today, I genuinely wonder, with some of the things that this administration's doing, I really wonder. Even with the Trump going after judges who sided against him, who ruled against him. These judges who refused to bend the knee to him, calling for them to be booted out, impeached, thrown out of their seat. And Mike Johnson now saying, well, we have the power to close some of these district courts. Wow. I don't remember being in a place like this. I've only been around 50 years, but I don't remember being in a place like this. All this to say, I'm curious, who will we know as our prophets going forward? Now, when I say prophets, I don't mean people who are predicting the future. Like, we have right-wing prophets who are telling us this is going to happen and that's going to happen. I don't mean those prophets. That's part of the job of a prophet. But if you look back in the Old Testament, the other parts of the job of the prophet are actually instructive. They're teachers. They're meant to be a corrective voice in the presence of leadership. They're meant to offer correction and encouragement. Okay, they're meant to help leadership act in ways that are godly. And again, as my wife pointed out to me this morning, they were not always welcomed in the courts of the rich and powerful. They weren't always welcomed in the courts of the authorities. As a matter of fact, there's a passage we just read it a couple of weeks ago where Jesus says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I wish I could, take you under my wings like a hen takes their chicks," and then this city that kills the prophets. Now he wasn't saying that. Yeah, he was actually describing how his people understood their history. That when God sent messengers and when God sent correction and when God sent prophets to let the authorities know that they were moving in the wrong direction, that they were doing things that were ungodly, that they weren't doing the things that God would have them do, that they were living ways that were seen as sinful in God's eyes, what happened? They got killed. They got stoned. They got put down. This, I think, is a time when we need the prophets to stand up. And we need the prophets to be seen. And we need the prophets to be heard. And we need people. And please understand, I'm not saying that Jeffrey Goldberg, for example, is a prophet because he came forward with that information that he gleaned when he was invited into a chat room on Signal with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland and the Secretary of the CIA and all these heads of the CIA. I'm not saying he is like God has anointed him prophet. I'm saying that those people, journalists, lawyers, judges, They have a prophetic role in our lives. Protesters have a prophetic role in our lives. Content creators have a prophetic role in our lives right now. We need people to be willing to stand up and say, this isn't okay. We need people to be willing to stand up and say, this isn't right. We need people willing to stand up and protect the Constitution of the United States. And listen, as a Canadian, I know somebody's going to say, oh, what does the Canadian have to say about this? This Canadian understands how this works historically. That when one country, one powerful country falls for this, others do as well. And if the U.S. were to go down that authoritarian path in full, then how much longer would it be before Canada chooses to follow? It's got to be stopped. This kind of attitude has to be stopped. The desire to shut people up has to be stopped. The desire to take power away from the courts, it's got to be stopped. The desire to silence the media, it has to be stopped. The desire to take away people's ability to protest, it's got to be stopped. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And we need, in order to do this, we need those, like I said, quote unquote, prophetic voices. We need those people to be willing to stand up and say, hey, dude, you're not wearing any pants, right? The emperor's got no clothes. We need people who are willing to stand up and say, no, this is the wrong way. We need people to be able to stand up and say, this is not godly. This is not of God. We need the church. We need the church to be willing to stand up and make its voice heard. Like Bishop Buddy, when she said, please remember that there are people out here who are terrified. Please be merciful and compassionate to them. We need people to be willing to stand up. You know, recently, today, actually, I was looking at it. We get a monthly newspaper from our national and our diocesan synod. And on the front page of this one, it had a picture of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance sort of meeting with Bishop Buddy at the cathedral in Washington during that service. I don't know if it was before or after her sermon, but there they were on the same picture, acknowledging, greeting one another. The headline spoke to the fact that we here in the Canadian Anglican Church of Canada now have to figure out how we're going to deal with another 4 years under the Trump administration in the United States. We know it's going to impact us here. That's what that paper is acknowledging. We know it's going to impact us here, and many are concerned. Well, the church has a responsibility to stand up and offer that prophetic word alongside the journalists and alongside the protesters and alongside the judges and alongside the lawyers. We have a responsibility to stand up with all people who are crying out, and not just out of their own pain, but crying out that this is wrong. So as we go forward, for you and I, you may be called to be that prophetic voice. And if you are, God bless you, and God protect you, and God be with you, and God empower you and strengthen you to do and say what is right and just, no matter the consequence. And for others, you may be called to stand beside the prophets. You may be called to stand beside those people who are telling the emperor that he's naked. You may be called to stand beside those people, to support those people, to encourage those people, and to empower those people. You may be the ones that God will use to give those prophets what they need in order to stand firm. And I would encourage you, if you can help support them, please do so. In whatever way that's possible, in whatever your capacity is, if you can help them, please do so. The prophets of the Old Testament, well, they were treated a lot like this. They were beaten up, and some of them were killed, and many were silenced. And the kings and the rulers, those people of authority, they did not want to hear those messages of correction. They did not want to hear those messages of challenge. They did not want to hear those messages that called them to repent of the ways that they were going. Because they, like many leaders throughout history, did not have the spiritual, the mental, the emotional strength in order to, the strength needed to know and to accept that a voice of dissension in your life is important, that every leader needs critics. You might not like what they have to say, but you need them. As a good and effective leader, you need to hear the voice of those prophets saying, wrong, do not do this, don't do that. You need to hear the voice of the prophets saying, there's another way that you should consider. You need to hear the voice of the prophets saying, I don't agree with this. This is not of God. This is not of health. This is not of love. This is not of light. This is something else. You need to be able to hear the voice of the prophets who say, this is selfish. This is self-serving and self-aggrandizing. This is bad for people. This is bad for most people. And it's only good for those who would take from others. Every leader needs to hear those opposing voices without threats that will impeach them, without threats that will deport them. I mean, how many? I got it on Twitter last week. Somebody said that we should deport Bishop Buddy, an American citizen. I've heard people talk about Democratic senators and congressional representatives like they were somehow criminals simply because they disagreed with an edict written from the Oval Office. That they're somehow criminal, vile, evil, rotten. They too should be expelled. I've heard people say that these voices of dissension against Trump, that they should be tried for treason and sentenced accordingly, simply because they disagree with their grand poobah. Effective, healthy leadership wants voices near that are willing to tell them they got no pants on. Effective and healthy leadership want voices nearby that are willing to challenge them and willing to correct them. So my prayer is that those who are called will stand up and be that voice, whether leadership wants it or not. My prayer is that those who are called will be willing to stand up and say those words, whether leadership wants to hear them or not. My prayer is that those who are called would be willing to stand up, to be seen, stand up, to be heard, offering the correction and challenge that God would have all leadership hear and embrace, whether leadership wants it or not. And that God would use all of us to help those prophetic voices, those voices of correction and challenge. That God would use all of us to help them in their godly work. Amen.